Thank you guys so much for joining. So we are going to be doing our goat breed overview tonight. But first I'd like to preface, I'm in my anatomy lab today at my school. So the skeletons in the corner they're just up here. It's not a weird prop. I'm not trying to fool with you guys or anything. They're just there. But we'll get into that. That right there is Avari. She's one of my Nigerian dwarfs, and her kid Hazel from last year. They're registered, but we're going to talk about that at the end of the video. If you guys want to, stay tuned for that. So what is a breed? A breed is a group of animals that share similar physical characteristics. They are specifically bred for a certain purpose. Now those purposes are typically meat, dairy, and fiber for the goats. I do not talk about fiber because I do not have enough experience in that, and since this thesis is based off of my experience and my research, I don't feel like it is good on me to give a good overview of that because I don't think I could accurately represent that information. So if you want to look into that, like the Angora breed, please follow up and do your own research on that because they are really interesting. I just don't feel like I can represent them well. We're talking about meat and dairy though. They have a lot of similar characteristics, but we're going to focus a lot on the differences to show what make them stand out and make them different. So meat goats have a rapid weight gain and muscle development. They are stockier in their body frame. They have less milk production typically compared to dairy goats. I have had boars that have very large udders and produce a lot of milk. It all depends on the animal that you're with. But typically they do have lower milk production. And their feed is typically promoting growth. So when we are talking about market weather specifically, we're looking at their rate of gain by day or by week, depending, just seeing how well they're growing and how well they're getting that musculature and that stocky body. When we're talking about dairy, however, dairies are known to have a lean and angular frame in comparison. They have higher milk production for longer periods of time. Like specifically when we're talking about trying to dry up or have them stop producing milk, it takes a lot longer for us to dry up our Toggenburgs, say, rather than our boars. So their feed also promotes higher lactation. They do eat a lot of food. I can speak from experience on that. And they are more labor intensive, which I would say in most cases is very true. Because a lot of people either hand milk their goats, they have milking machines, and their kids are typically pulled off the mom and bottle raised or bucket raised. We personally don't do that, but it's all what you're wanting to use the milk for. And another thing I will note about the dairy goats, so meat goats, we're typically looking at their structure, their musculature. Dairy goats, it's a lot, the scorecard is evenly balanced between the memory system and the structure of the goat because those are both very, very important. And when we're looking at the memory system, we are looking for a good fore udder, we're looking for the rear udder arch. We're trying to see we're trying to demonstrate capacity because we want to be able to feed the kids as well as feed ourselves for our own uses. So that is something that is very different between those two scorecards when you're looking at them, but it's very interesting. We're looking at the meat breeds. We have 6 breeds that I put up here that are, I would argue, are the most common within the US. Now, it depends because there are very common crosses as well. I'm just keeping it specifically to like the more traditional breeds. So first we have the boar, most common breed of meat goat in the United States as of the beginning of this year. And those are what I'm going to have the most sections on during the breed tours, which I've already filmed those, but there'll be a sub-series underneath this, so stay tuned for that. We also have the Kiko, the Spanish, the Savannah, the myotonic or the fainting goat, which a lot of people don't realize that fainting goats are actually meat goats, so there's that little tidbit of information. We also have the Nubians. So note the Nubians there, we will see those again. And then for dairy, we have the Nigerian dwarf, the Toggenburg, the Nubian, the La Mancha, the Alpine, the Oberhalsey, and the Saanen. Now I specifically will talk about the Nigerian dwarf, the Toggenburg, the Nubian, and the La Mancha, those first 4 within the breed tours. That will be more on those later because those are breeds that I personally have experience with and can speak to their traits the best. But all these breeds are really wonderful and are excellent in the show ring as well. Now dual purpose, you will notice that I mentioned the Nubian twice. Dual purpose means that they're used for multiple purposes, well, really 2. So Nubians are milk goats as well as meat goats. Specifically, the does are used for milk mostly, and the wethers, once they grow up, we typically see them in the auction rings for meat purposes. So there's that. And hybrid vigor. This is a crossing of two breeds to get enhanced characteristics. So we see this in, I would argue, all aspects of livestock, and specifically within the goats, we are looking for higher growth, milk yield, parasite and disease resistance, which is a huge concern of the boars from what we noticed. They have a lot less worm resistance, and that is just due to our climate versus Africa, where they're originally from. But we'll talk about that in future videos. They also are trying to breed for higher muscling. So that is specifically what the Gene Master is breeding for, which are the Kiko boars. And those are really common, as well as Boer Nubians and Laboras, which is a combination between a La Mancha and a Boer. And we also see mini breeds, and I believe there is a mini breed registry. I haven't really checked up on that in a while. But, you know, mini Nubians, mini Toggenburgs. We did have some mini Toggenburgs last year. They are very, very cute. Now, when we're talking about register, I just mentioned the mini registry. So we have also the ABGA and the ADGA. Now, ABGA is the American Boar Goat Association. ADGA is the American Dairy Goat Association. Those have known and documented pedigrees from those animals that are registered in them. They have certain breed standards. Like specifically when we're talking about Toggenburgs, they must have white patches of a certain size or wattles and a very certain color pattern. They can be registered on percentage for boars specifically. So you can have 33%, 75%. It's all within a range there. And we have some that are percentage boars as well as full blood. And there's also an emphasis on lineage and strong genetics along with performance. So that is a big focus of those registries. And you're typically able to sell them for a higher value. It also, you know, you're still looking for the common characteristics, like what does their structure look like? What do their offspring look like? But register ones typically do sell higher, and they also have higher quality, but it all depends on what kind of breeder you're going to. Now when we're looking at commercial, which this right here is my Stella, and actually kind of me in the background of that, when we won, I don't remember, it was my senior year of high school, it was a long time ago now. But anyways, they are not registered and they're focusing on production rather than pedigree. So you can still notice Stella has a very beautiful structure, but her value is based on her performance, like this, rather than her pedigree. And they could also be crossbred. So right there we see the Labora, you know, the little elf ears, the gopher ears, however you prefer to call them. And I would argue that most animals fall into this category. So they're not registered and they're crossbred. So that's a lot of them in there. Stella is purebred, but she was just off of a commercial farm. So now grade is similar to commercial, and a lot of people get them mixed up. So grade goats are not registered and they are still focused on their pedigree and their breed type, but they don't have them written. So this is typically for dairy goats because dairy goats cannot have horns. If they have horns and they're out of pedigreed stock, then they would be grade because you cannot show them. And like I said, they are a very common term in dairy goats, which we can note the Nubian with horns and the Toggenburg with horns. So there's that aspect. And then what other purposes are goats raised for? Goats are often raised for pets. So that can look like companion animals, therapy animals, or goat yoga, which a lot of people have heard of, but I feel like they typically use Nigerian dwarf babies for that, but it could be any breed from what I understand. And that right there is Rosie up in the top corner, if you guys can see, and Daisy and Poppy. Those are our first goats that we ever got. We also have them for clearing brush, which is fire fuel reduction, invasive plant management, and people often hire goats to clear out blackberries or other various management. We also have pack animals. They are used for hiking and for hunting. They're typically really good. They have certain weight limits, but if you have a whole herd, as you can see in that picture, it's not so much of an issue. Those are typically dairy goats as well. So those look like they're mostly alpines. So I've seen alpines, I've seen Oberhalsies, and I've seen a lot less floppy-eared because a lot of people don't want them to catch up in their packs. But that right there is a great overview, and hopefully you stay tuned for the sub-series because it's going to be great, hopefully.